British Columbia is a place of almost bewildering diversity. I mean, look, I know Canada's big. There's a lot of variety in a lot of provinces. In Ontario, Toronto is not Timmins. In Quebec, Lac-Saint-Jean is not the West Island. Just right here in Vancouver, I mean, it's a clean, chic, progressive city here on the left coast. And yet, those gleaming towers behind me also house some of the most aggressive libertarian entrepreneurs in Canada, overlooking the notorious Wreck Beach, where the hippies hang out. And speaking of that, even in the politics inside the NDP, you've got the tree huggers and then the unionized loggers trying to cut down the tree they're hugging. And just as an example of BC's paradox, behind me, the convention centre was created by the incredibly right-wing Soak-Red government. The Crown Corporation owns it. Where's the logic in that? Now, speaking of tree huggers, see, right outside Vancouver, you got these incredible mountains, and they just go on and on, all the way to Alaska. It's an environmental paradise. This endangered species find a home here, but it's also where some of the most aggressive resource extraction in the entire country takes place. And all this in Vancouver, the chic, the prosperity, the drive and the energy is just a few blocks from the squalor of the Lower East Side. In short, you've got everything in British Columbia except boring homogeneity.
All right, John, great case. It is not boring. Here's my question. Is it difficult for the voter in BC to have much fear factor of an end to prosperity when the place looks, and you've demonstrated tonight, looks like it's just dripping of wealth, not just aesthetic wealth, not just the environment, but real money?
Well, I think that British Columbia voters are, in some sense, they're accustomed to that. BC has the third largest population in the country and has had for more than half a century, but it's got the fourth largest economy, lagging well behind Alberta and at peace with it. And there, in some sense, it's not irrational if you live in a place as beautiful as BC to say, we're going to preserve this beauty, even if it does cost us a little bit in the way of prosperity. But remember also, Adrian Dix is promising that he's not from the crazy wing of the NDP, that he's not Dave Barrett, this wacky government of the early 70s, and that he's not the guys who were lined up behind Mike Harcourt in the early 90s, waiting to raise taxes, go after the forest industry, and do other stuff that just wasn't logical. Now, whether the NDP can really keep these instincts in check, whether if elected they can contain their propensity to do things just because they shock conservatives and free enterprisers, remains to be seen. But Adrian Dix's promise in part is that. What are they're calling this, their slogan, change that works for you, one practical step at a time? I mean, this just stinks of not being loony left-wing.
All right, here's the question. Is free enterprise no longer the positive buzzword it once was? I mean, are people opting for security in the public sector? And is that more appetizing, the public sector candy, as opposed to the free enterprise opportunity?
I think that free enterprise has lost some of its appeal, and I think the reason is quite simple. People have been getting elected for years by talking about free enterprise, and when they get in office, they deliver big government. And eventually voters conclude that big government, free enterprise and socialism look a lot alike. I mean, take the Harper Tories, please. Every week I get dozens of press releases from them on how they're subsidizing this company and causing that to happen and interfering in the lives of citizens in this way and that way. And then they say, and imagine those awful liberals were in power. They'd spend all kinds of money. After the Harper Tories increased program spending 40%. And again, the BC Liberals, yeah, they cut taxes on the theory that lower tax rates mean more money to spend, but they kept right on spending. It's not a free enterprise government. So again, voters are told this is free enterprise, and they think, oh, well, so I guess it's not that great, and maybe we'll try something that promises to protect the environment as well.
It just seems that in Western Canada, most of the new growth, the high-wage jobs, are coming from energy. So explain to the country, John Robson, give me that helicopter perspective as to why people in BC would enthusiastically, it looks like they're being enthusiastically supportive of a potential government that wants to virtually turn the energy tap off.
I think part of it is that the NDP is more cautious in its language than I fear it will be in its policies. They want to get into natural gas instead of oil. They're not totally against pipelines. They're just against a whole bunch of tanker traffic coming from the terminal at the end of the pipeline. But the other factor that people in the rest of Canada tend to downplay or not know about BC is that BC voters are contrarians. They are at least as alienated from Canada as Quebecers. And if the rest of the country says you've got to build pipelines, that will cause BC voters to elect a government that doesn't want them.
How do you square this circle. You got tree huggers and rioters in the same province. Deal with that, would you, John?
Well, BC is given to extremes, and it's a much more polarized politics than in most parts of the country. You know, NDP versus Soak-Reds. It's not middle against left or middle against right. It's left against right. And inside the parties, inside the right-wing parties in BC, you've got your libertarian capitalists who are on the whole progressive on social issues, and then you've got your Bible Belt conservatives in the interior or among the new immigrants. And they're over on the left, you've got your environmentalists and your unionized loggers. You've got your government bureaucrats and your back to the land hippies. So it's not just that there's intense partisan dislike between parties in BC, but within parties. And it's one of the things I love about BC is that people are less apologetic. They're not this halfway. When someone in BC believes something, right or left, you know, modern progressive or old-time unionist, social conservative or social libertarian, they believe it wholeheartedly. And that's what I say, you've got Wreck Beach. There's a nude beach where strange smells are often encountered, very close to extremely well-scrubbed chic restaurants and venture capital.
Explain to me how the unionized logger who presumably wants a job is going to hug the trees and prevent the job from sprouting. Explain that to me.
Well, one thing to bear in mind is that the union worker in BC now is a government worker. Of the top 5 donors to the BC NDP, 3 are public sector unions, and 1 is the umbrella BC Federation of Labour, which again is now dominated by public sector unions. So the loggers are just less important. Resource industry is only about 8% of the provincial GDP. Unionization in the resource industry is only about 36%. So the cold calculation by the party, they're not that important. But I think the loggers also figure it's a big province. You can preserve a lot of it, and there's still room to cut down trees.
John, thank you so much for the analysis.
My pleasure.
John.